Hi, Jim. How are you?
Great, thanks. Here on the
How's
North
everything?
Shore.
You're over in Hawaii, right? At the moment.
I'm on the North Shore. I'm sitting right now at the house directly in front of Pubakea and looking down towards the pipeline.
Are you over there for the contest, or are you?
So actually, we're over
What takes
here
you over?
shooting a documentary uh, series of episodes about surfing. The
Hmm.
one we're working on right now has to do with lifeguards.
Okay.
And their relationship to the whole surfing world, and in particular that in Hawaii, where it's the most dangerous sort of stretch of coast, more rescues and more dangerous rescues and so forth than probably anywhere.
Yeah.
And as you know, like lifeguards are generally really good surfers. So it sort of came upon us when we interviewed 17 of what I thought were the best guys to do, and 11 of them turned out to be lifeguards. We decided that lifeguards would be a good story. And so that's one of the episodes. And we just had a real exciting thing happen over the last, well, just before Christmas. Greg McGilvery, who McGilvery Freeman Films did Five Summer Stories back, in the 70s as sort of one of the biggest surf films of all time, and Jim Freeman was killed in a helicopter crash. But Greg McGilvery went on to work with Stanley Kubrick and do like 40 IMAX films and win Oscars and so forth, and has become a pretty a pretty um, amazing guy in the film world. And
Hmm.
but we've stayed friends all this time, and I was talking to him and telling him about what I was doing, and he said out of the blue, I might be interested in doing that. So I about fell out of my chair. I said, "Greg, don't move. I've got the paperwork right here." Anyway, long story short, within 3 weeks of time, we've inked a deal with him to produce the series, and now
Nice.
we're gonna be taking it to market with Greg, which couldn't be better.
And is it just going to be looking at the lifeguards over in Hawaii, like on the North Shore? Or is it kind of looking at different areas as well?
At this point, this episode is just about Hawaiian lifeguards, because what we're really trying to do is do a story on the North Shore, but have it be the typical thing that everybody does every time. And here's the Triple Crown, and here's the pipeline, and here's but more
Yeah.
trying to give it a feel of like the local thing.
Nice.
So we I think it's going to be really good, because it's got rescues, it's got everything you can imagine involved in it.
Yeah, and I mean, like these guys are almost they're sort of all-rounded watermen, aren't they? It's not just them being surfers. They're sort of you know
Oh yeah, I
they're
mean
divers and you name it, right?
I mean,
Just
Butch Van Arsdalen, who was Mr. Pipeline. Butch Van Arsdalen, who was Mr. Pipeline, was the first lifeguard at Pipeline. Eddie Aikau, who was the master of Waimea Bay, was the first lifeguard on the North Shore, and and worked Waimea Bay almost exclusively. And then on from there, everyone that Derek Dorner, who was one of the first guys to surf Jaws.
mhm.
All of the lifeguards are right to the young guys today are just amazing watermen, and all of them pretty much excellent surfers.
Nice. Good stuff. Well, I'd love
Yeah.
to, if you're okay, like to jump back into um, where it all sort of began with your, I guess your love of surfing and also writing and journalism, and kind of like where like if it was surfing first and then writing, or if it sort of happened
That
at the same
connected.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I started surfing a lot younger than I started writing. When I have to pay tribute to Gidget. When I was, I don't know, 8 years old, the movie Gidget came out, and
Hmm.
after I'd seen Gidget, I didn't want to be an astronaut. I didn't want to be a cowboy. I didn't want to be a detective. I just wanted to be a surfer, and all those other things that you want to be when you're a kid went right out the
Yeah.
window. And so anyway, I started surfing then, and I was living on Guam. I was born on Guam. My parents were in civil service, so we traveled all over the South Pacific mostly,
Yeah.
and so I learned to surf there on Guam. and then for high school I moved back to California and started surfing in California, and that's sort of, high school is when I started writing for, sort of began writing. And then I went to school at Cal Western University, which is now another school, but it's right on Point Loma, where Sunset Cliffs, and it's a whole wave field. So I could surf every day going to school, and that's when I really started sort of majoring in journalism and learning how to write. And not too long after that, I got a job at writing articles for Surfing Magazine. I was traveling a lot to Europe and Morocco and Australia.
And you were studying in England as well, weren't you?
I studied in England,
University of Sussex,
so went to Cornwall and surfed in the early days back when it was still a very robust surfing culture in England. It's amazing, and many of the people who were there are still there, are still sort of powerhouses in that area. But I went down to France and got turned on to sort of the Basque Country waves, and then down through Spain and to Morocco, and then that just became kind of a circuit for me. I would buy a bunch of stuff that I was selling there, mostly Hawaiian shirts.
I heard you had a bit of a business enterprise going on to fund your endless summer. You were flogging Hawaiian shirts, which you bought in California, right? And then you
So it was one of those things that everybody in Europe wanted this stuff, and this is before the internet, before people were really connected, so no one really knew how to order anything. No one could really talk. You had to write letters, I mean, just going to the. I mean, it's so amazing to think, just like not that long ago, you had to go to the post office to make a phone call to anywhere outside of your region, and in France at least. And so we were pretty much had the field to ourselves. So I would buy Hawaiian shirts for 50 cents and sell them for 20 quid. And and so I used to joke with all with my friends who were dope dealers, and I'd say, I have a much better markup than you do, and I'm legal. So anyway, that circuit went for, I don't know, I probably did that from for 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, and got to travel all over, because everybody wanted those then, and they were only in the thrift stores. No one was making them. There wasn't Hang Ten wasn't making Hawaiian shirts. They made other stuff, surf stuff, but it wasn't that. So until Ocean Pacific came along, there wasn't any other source. So it was great. And we'd just surf movies over there. We'd do, we'd travel, live in France for 4 or 5 months, and then live in Spain, and then go down to Morocco, and then come back to Paris and trade our tickets for someone else's. And no one even ever checked that stuff. You could just go and hand your ticket and your passport, didn't have to say anything about it. I laugh
crazy.
Now. You'd have 40 marshals, escorting you off the plane if you ever did that at this point in time. But then it was no big deal. You just bought someone else's ticket and traded for a later date. And as long as you had a ticket, the passport, you were on the plane.
There was no COVID certificates or anything like that back then.
No.
And then were you still studying, or was this kind of after you did your MBA?
This was after school. Yeah, this was after school. This was I had seen that that there was a market there, and I actually was doing an MBA course in international business. So that's how I sort of got started. Is that actually, it's a fun story if you have the time. But I was down on in England there's a summer for 3 weeks, and so it was the middle of July, and I was walking around on the King's Road looking at all the cool stuff, and I was wearing a Hawaiian shirt because it was the only time for that short period that you'd be able to wear one. And but you had to catch the train back to Sussex, where I was going to school, University of Sussex, and you had to catch the train back, or you'd have to spend the night in London, which would be super expensive, right? But but as I was so I was rushing to get back to the train station, and I was at the tube at Sloane Square, and this guy just stopped me on the street and he said, "I'll give you 50 quid for that shirt." I guess because I looked confused, he said, "I'll give you 50 pounds sterling for that shirt." I said, "No, I know what a quid is, but what do you want my shirt for?" He said, "You're from California, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're a surfer, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I want that shirt." So I said, "Well, look, I've got to catch this train. I'd love to sell it to you, but I'm late." He said, "I'm giving you 50 quid. Buy another shirt." I said, "No, you don't understand. If I have to stay in London, I'll spend all that money tomorrow, you know?" So he took the 50 quid note out of his pocket and he held it up and he said, "I want that shirt. Take it off." And meanwhile, in my mind, going through 50 pounds then was like, there was a book out then called Europe on $5 a day. And the joke among students was, if you were paying $5 to like live in Europe, you were new, because you never knew how to spend that much money to do it. That was for tourists, right? So I'm thinking,
especially if you're going down to Morocco as well, and then
really everywhere. It was amazing. It was, I mean, that period in time. So anyway, I'm calculating and thinking that's 3 months in Biarritz, So I'm thinking the 50-pound note out of his pocket, and he held it right in front of me and he said, "I want that shirt. Take it off right now." And I rode home on that train for like 2.5 hours with no shirt on. So, but I got 3 months in Biarritz. It'd be like someone offering you, I don't know, $3,000 now. I mean, like in terms of what it would buy. So anyway, I realized right then that there was this huge market there, and so I just went home. That's what I wrote my thesis on. I couldn't figure out what I was going to write my master's thesis for my MBA, but then I knew right then that was the ticket. Export California products to Europe. And so anyway, I went back and did that for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And in the meantime, I started writing articles for Surfer and Surfing and sending them in. And the guys at Surfing just published one right off the bat. And so I thought, wow, maybe there's a hope for a writing, career, really.
And was it mainly like focused on your travel experiences within surfing, like with the articles that you were doing, or?
Yeah, mostly it was travel, because in those days that was a little more rare, like people couldn't get to places, and it was pretty adventurous just going to France and Spain and Morocco, especially Morocco was a super adventure in those days. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. So anyway, that turned into a writing assignment, and I began writing for Surfing Magazine, and then Surfer offered me a job as an associate editor, and then things just went really fast. I went from being an associate editor to the editor to ending up being the publisher in about 3 years, and so I ran the magazine for, I don't know, a decade or so, and it was really, really fun, most fun time, because you get to meet everybody. And you're neutral. You're Switzerland. You're not working for a brand, so everybody lets you into their house. The Volcom house, the Quick house, the Billabong house. They're all happy to see you. It was a total shock to me when I started working for a brand, and I had all these friends all over the world and all these other brands, and all of a sudden it was like, no, you can't come in anymore. You can't. They were always saying, yeah, come into our business meeting and tell us what you think. And all of a sudden it was like, well, nice to talk.
There's this spy here, just trying to sneak in.
Yeah. So,
and this was like kind of as I've heard you say. I mean, this is like the bridge generation, right? So like late 70s.
Yeah.
Started pro surfing when that all began. The whole evolution in board design, which then obviously changed everything, right?
Yeah.
How was that? Like,
so
I mean, now looking back on it, it was.
Well, I'm really glad I had that experience. It was an exciting time, because I learned to surf on a longboard like everybody did, back pre shortboard revolution. And so one of the things that I think is funny that people don't really know if they weren't in that time is how little anyone knew about shortboards, like shapes. No one really knew anything about what worked. They had honed the longboarding to an art, and everyone knew the kind of rails you needed, the kind of tails you needed. Once they cut the board down 2 or 3 feet, it was like, they started out with giant V bottoms, which were an absolute disaster.
And they went really short, didn't they? Like it was kind of like short. It went from like 10 to like 5, and like all these like crazy shapes
and big, thick, thick turned down rail boards with square tails and huge fins, and I mean it was. And of course, the thing was about it is that if you were Nat Young or Wayne Lynch or Billy Hamilton, you'd make those boards look fabulous, right? Yeah. They'd look like they were magic. And so we all wanted. I was working at Surfboards Hawaii at the time. I got a job rubbing rails there, and Billy Hamilton was shaping there at the time, and so at lunch break we'd all run down to Moonlight Beach and go surf, and of course most of that was sitting watching Billy surf, but. He was riding these horrible V-bottoms and looking so unbelievable. We just all had to have them, right? Not really realizing that Billy Hamilton could be riding a telephone pole and look elegant,
Yeah.
So it set everybody surfing back a year or two in those days. But then everybody figured out kind of what started to work, and then shortboards became a whole new way of riding waves. The entire trajectory of someone's track was completely different from longboarding.
And would you say, like, was it still like when you started the magazine when you were at Surfer? Was it still that time when it was predominantly focused on the Hawaiian scene and California and the West Coast, or was there more sort of little bits of like sort of
tradition was and that was something that I was really adamant about was covering the professional circuit, which had just started, literally the year I started, and at the same time, recognizing, nobody knew who Michael Peterson was. I mean, they knew who Wayne Lynch and Nat Young were because Nat had won the 1966 World Contest. So, and he was a huge star, and then Evolution made both of them stars, because it was such a popular surf movie. But no one knew who, for instance, Michael Peterson was. And Michael Peterson, in my opinion, was the best surfer in the world at the time, And so I was determined that it was gonna break out from the 10 guys they were shooting at the magazine at the time. And I was
there any focus on Kira or like any of the kind of like the point breaks?
Slowly, that's when it really started. That's when we really started sort of covering Australia, covering Europe, covering Indonesia. I published the first article on Nios. When it was the first time it was sort of photographed by Eric Ader back in the day, and so it was for me, and I love traveling. So a lot of the magazine turned its focus to travel as well, because that was what was really before the professional circuit took hold. That was kind of the only way that a good surfer could prove themselves, so to speak. You know what I mean? It was like, I used to call it merit badges. You got a merit badge for surfing, Ulu, and a merit badge for surfing Jeffries, and a merit badge for surfing Labar, and and Killers, and because there wasn't anything else. But once the circuit started, then the guys that were really good, sort of began to like filter truly to the top, and things changed that way. And by and large, I think that the professional circuit is a positive thing, but I think the emphasis of it being the only thing about surfing is not only not really that accurate, but also not really that good for the business of surfing, which are the people who are putting on the circuit are the people who are in business. But I think if they wanted to sell more clothes, they wouldn't just do the circuit as if the only thing about it was the National Football League.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, like 99% of surfers can't surf like that, right? So it's sort of
absolutely
the majority of people that are out of water.
But what's beautiful is that about surfing, and I try to explain this to people, is that surfing is a participatory sport. It's not a spectator sport. I think that people in surfing get to surf with their heroes. They get to surf with the best surfers in the world. If you've had a lot of pipeline, or even at lower trestles, you're going to be surfing with Kelly Slater. You're going to be surfing with Brother. You're going to be surfing with the best guys in the world and women in the world. And when does anybody ever get to throw a pass with Tom Brady? When does anyone ever get to get a pass from Massey? It doesn't happen. Like they're completely separate from the spectators that are there. Whereas with surfing, everybody surfs and everybody gets to enjoy being with the best people and watching
which is incredible. Like I was out 2 days ago in Portugal, Carcavelos, and there was like Frederico Morales and Kanoa were out and all their entourage, and all of a sudden you look up and there's like 3 drones above you, and they're like, oh, okay, like
right.
obviously like shooting today. And like in soccer, tennis, whatever the other sport, like all these mainstream sports, exactly what you said, you just don't have that. So I think that almost, I don't know, it makes you like want to surf even more. The way I kind of look at that, and you sort of like,
it's a tribe. It isn't a team that people root for. It's a tribe that people interact with. You go hunting with the best hunters in the world, and you get to race at Indianapolis, and you know what I mean. You may come in dead last out of 300 people that are out at Indianapolis at that time, but you're on the track. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're still going 150, even though they're going 200. And so there's just something about surfing that's so participatory, and so it's so you're so immersed in the culture of it that I think it makes it a way more compelling experience as a sport, if you will. And that's why people say it's a lifestyle, not a sport, because it isn't something that you only do on Sundays for 3 hours. And so but yeah, so that sort of took us through that era that then became the board revolution. Had a kind of second burst, and that was when the twin fins and then the thrusters came in, and that the shortboard came in the sort of 66, 67, 68 period, and then again in like sort of 78, we got twin fins and thrusters by 79 or 80, and that again revolutionized sort of surfing performance, if you will. And it was a fun thing to watch, and an interesting time to be at in the media, because at that time it was such a powerful position. Who you put on the cover, who you interviewed, who you ran articles on or put in the center spread. If you were on the cover of Surfer, it like made your career. You were I mean, as hard as that
it would have been a political time with brands as well, right? Obviously, with who's got the inside spread and the back cover and all that stuff, and then who they're sponsoring, and
absolutely, no, that, I mean, and it was one of the few places in the world where you could literally run ads and build a brand. I mean, if you ran ads for long enough, you were an established brand in the surf industry, and because everyone knew what the game was, you could only really play it if you were a real surfer, because anyone else would be. It was just so the culture was so strong, and it was such a small universe that anyone coming in who wasn't connected was obvious. They stood out like a big giant blinking red light, and so the whole it was almost a formula. You got some really great surfers, you got them to wear your stuff, you ran ads in the magazine, you took those clothes to the surf shops, and the surf shop was a huge distribution channel at that stage, and it was one that had no competition except its own surfers. Its own brands.
There was no online, right? You're not buying, like, there wasn't
no online, and exactly. No one like a Nautica or a Christian Dior. No one else could go to a surf shop. You had to be a surf brand, right? But there were a couple thousand surf shops. So, if you were doing $1,000 in a couple thousand surf shops, you were already doing a couple $1,000,000, and just right out of the gate. And you could do that with a T-shirt line. So it was really a fertile time for for people being able to make a living out of the industry, so to speak, or the culture. And And so I went on to to Transworld Publications, which started snowboarding and skateboarding.
You were the publisher there, right? Is that they kind of approached you to kind of
because I had publishing
oversee that
experience.
operation.
And again, it was just like one of those things where everything was so new. If you had experience, then no one else knew the game.
Yeah.
I mean, today there'd be 100 guys that could do that job, but at the time, people always ask me, well, "How did you get to be the publisher of Surfer in 3 years?" And I always say, "Well, I had a degree in journalism, so I had that part of it. I had an MBA, so I kind of had the business side, and I'd been surfing for 20 years. I mean, that's the weirdest combination of
and
things
pretty well traveled as well, right?
you could possibly have. You know what I mean? Like what surfer knows business and what journalist knows surfing. It's like the whole combo is just too weird. And now there's lots of people like that, but at the time it was a very, very odd combo, but perfect for what I was doing. Perfect for what it ended up being. So, like everything, there's a lot of luck involved in life, and sometimes you just trip and fall into a pot of gold. And that's what I feel like I've been doing my whole life. So I feel lucky.
But you've always sort of steered it that way, right? Is what I was seeing. So like going from like with the Transworld job, when you're traveling for a couple of years, going to all these different like ski resorts and sort of based on snowboarding and checking out different resorts across North America and.
No, that was another unbelievably cool, fun job. Basically the job was to try to open up all the resorts to snowboarding, because that way we'd have an audience that the advertisers would advertise with. So the first thing we had to do is get the resorts open. So we had to go to all the resorts, and of course they give you 3 days worth of free tickets and tell you to have fun and take you around and wine and dine you, and so it was great. It was a great job. And we went everywhere from Stowe in Vermont to Lake Louise and Whistler and Chamonix in France, and the whole gamut. So it was really fun. And then I got an opportunity to do the Quiksilver, to work for Quiksilver, to do this crossing boat. I think I think the audience is familiar with it. I'm not really sure. It's been a long time ago now, but they leased this boat from Martin Daly, who had was sort of the progenitor of the whole boat trip business, taking people to wherever, and so a very prescient exec at Quiksilver, Bruce Raymond, thought it would be a great idea to use that as kind of, in the way I described it, as kind of the Quiksilver Goodyear blimp. It's like you everywhere you go, you're an icon. You're this iconic thing that says Quiksilver on it, and everywhere in the world people are taking pictures of it and writing about it. And so I did that for a few years. We traveled all around the world looking for surf spots.
I mean, that is the dream tour, right? I mean, I know they talk about like, with the CT and everything, but sort of like looking at that, and it was sort of like over 100 waves that you guys discovered.
Yeah.
All over, really, right?
Yeah. You've really done your homework. But yeah, that's true. It's it was a really great opportunity to go. But for me, and I mean, this is what, for me, it was like, I knew that it wouldn't last forever because they weren't going to run it forever. But also I was like, I had kids, and my kids were, they were young, and I was on the boat I'd be on the boat for 3 or 4 weeks, away from the family. So there's a funny story. I don't know how, you might have to clean this one up, but so I went to Bob McKnight, who was the owner of Quiksilver USA.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Bob, is there any other job I could have at Quiksilver where I could be at home more? And I'll never forget this. He leaned across the table and looked at me and he went, fuck you, Kempton. You have the best job in the industry and you want another job? And I said, okay,
That's
okay,
classic.
I get it. You know, he said, someone's going to have to die to have a job better than when you got here, right? So,
Exactly.
so I realized that I wasn't there wasn't really a future of, you know, in that realm. And so I was talking to Billabong one day, and the guy who was the head of Billabong then, Paul Naudet, said, why don't you come over and work for me, and you can be the media director, which, you know, was an easy transition for me, you know, and you know, from, because he knew me from the magazine days. And so that's what I did for, gosh, I don't know, 11 years or so, 12 years. Was worked at Billabong, which was a great run. We had tons of fun, and I got to travel still a whole lot as well, because we were the sponsors of the amateur world titles. So whenever they were there, and of course then going to Hawaii, you know, the women's contest in Honolulu, and then we got the Pipe Masters. You know, the Pipe Masters.
Were you looking after the team as well?
Pardon?
Were you looking after the team? Was that sort of part of the role, or was it mainly sort of like looking at the media side and the marketing?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
It was. I mean, I worked with the team a lot because my job was to get them in front of the media, and so. You know, I used to. It was kind of funny. I became really good friends with everybody's wives, but particularly Andy's wife, because I just call her and say, "Hey, is Andy going to show up for this? Because I'm not going to book CBS, you know, unless Andy's going to show up." You never knew, you know. And if she said yes, then I would book it. So
How was it working with Andy? Would you be like, you'd just be trying calling him, or would you always would you go to his wife and try and get her to give him a nudge?
But you know, Andy would say, you know, Andy was very off the cuff. You know, he'd say yes to anything, and then when it came down to it, maybe it wasn't, you know, going to be that. Maybe you know, the same thing with the surfboard. He'd say, you know, I mean, his shaper, you know, he'd say, I think you should make it a little more this, a little that, and he'd go, yeah, do that, and then he wouldn't like the surfboard, you know. So, I mean, she was just a really. She was very dedicated to him, and she was squared away, you know. So I could count on her being reliable, you know. Yeah. But anyways, it was a fun job. It was a great gig, and and so eventually, I mean, I got to the stage where I just felt like I needed to find something where I would have longevity, because, you know, being in a brand is a young man's game, you know. And so eventually I had an opportunity to work for the California Surf Museum, which is where I still am. And so I kind of transitioned into being at the California Surf Museum, which is a really, really fun thing as well. But it kind of got me into writing books. I wrote one for for a publishing group that ended up doing a how-to book that I did, and then I did one for for Santa.
Is that that's the surfing manual, right?
Yes, worst name in the world.
I've actually. I got it here. And I was just reading the bio, and it was. I remember I was studying. So back, this is kind of going back about, was it early 2000s? I was doing a surfing course on the Gold Coast. It was a surfing studies course, and I was like remembering. So I think I picked it up then when I was. So like, was that your first book then? That was kind of what you were doing.
That was the first book that was No, I think actually the first book was about San Onofre. It was sort of a history of San Onofre, and I published it, and then those guys came to me. That publishing group came to me and asked me if I would do one, and I really didn't want it. They wanted me to do a how-to book, and I told them that I really wasn't interested in that, but I'd had this experience which was really cool, which was one day out surfing at Trestles, and Tommy Carroll was out, and Mike Newling. I don't know if you know Mike Newling, but Mike was originally from England. His family, the Newling family, was one of the best surfing families in England in that time, but they moved to Australia. And so Mike was kind of world-class surfer, and he and Tommy became really good friends. And so they were both over here surfing the lefts at Trestles. And so I paddled out and was surfing with them, and Tommy gave me a wave, and I rode it all the way to the beach. You get a wave, he gives you one, And as I'm paddling back out, he rides one, and then I see Mike Newling ride one. And when Mike kicked out, Tommy paddled over and sort of was talking to him, right? And I remember thinking, God, I wish I could hear what he's telling Mike, because that whatever it is, it's like the best advice in the whole world, right? Like you couldn't get better advice than that. So I actually told those guys that story, and I said, I'd like to write a book like that, where the best surfers in the world tell me about how to do a bottom turn, or how to ride in the tube, or how to pump down the line, or how to roll a wave, or whatever all the different things are. And they liked it. And of course I had access to everybody at Billabong. So I had Shane Dorian for big waves, and Andy and Taj for airs, and Rasta, and I had everybody that you could possibly want. And I had access to all their photos, So that's how that book came about. And then I'd always wanted to tell stories about surfing, and I had a whole bunch of them, and I couldn't figure out how. I knew those wouldn't get published probably. So I thought maybe I'd do a cookbook, because I love to cook, and I had all these recipes from all over the place, and I pitched it. And 30 seconds after I sent it to this literary agent, they wrote me back and said, when can we meet? So I was just blown away, and so that ended up being the First We Surf Then We Eat book. And
Nice.
It was really fun book to do. Did very well. And so my agent, when a couple of years later, when the book starts to wane in sales, she said, "What are you going to do for your next book?" And I really had no idea, but I had done an exhibit at the California Surf Museum on women, called Women on Waves, and we spent like 2 years researching it, because it's you do it a little bit at a time. When I say 2 years, it wasn't like we worked 8 hours a day, but for 2 years we sort of gathered information, we interviewed people, we did stuff. And for an exhibit, of course, it's a pretty short. It's not a comprehensive thing. You maybe can cover 20 or 30 people in it. The top, obviously, the giants of each period. But what it did do is it gave me the sort of the skeleton of the women's surfing history.
Yeah.
And so.
And this is going way back since when surfing began, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's what you find out, is that women have been surfing since the dawn, since the Hawaiians, the Hawaiian queens and princesses. And like the very first thing in my book, the very first opening the chapter is that the oldest surfboard in the world is a Hawaiian princess's surfboard. 1640 is what they date it to, and they know this from oral history with the, of that time. And they found that she had it with her, like the Egyptians do in their tombs, like
really?
When they're buried with their favorite objects, and hers was her surfboard. So, and there's a whole like oral history of that. So we know that that's what it was. So surfing since 1640, and so once I got into that, I realized that I was writing the history of surfing just from a particular viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of really perplexed about how to deal with who's going to be in it and who's not. So I just kind of made a decision that I was going to try and include everyone that I thought was worthy, and not worry about how big the book was. My publisher was totally freaked out. She said, the book's going to be 800 pages long, And I said, yeah, but every person I put in here is going to buy a book. And so are their parents.
Were you just like looking at generations, or like, how did you choose? Were you kind of like looking at like sort of who that most iconic, I guess, surfer was at the time, or?
Yeah, it runs pretty much chronologically. So,
okay.
So the book is 42 chapters, and it goes right up to the present day, right up to the Olympics. The Olympics is kind of the cutoff of when it was, and that was kind of neat too, because the first edition sold out. The first edition sold out before it shipped, so I had time to, before they printed the second edition. That was right at the Olympics, and so after then I could add everything from the Olympics afterwards. That happened. So that's kind of the ending of it, which is a nice place to be able to stop. You know what I mean? It's a nice bookend for right now. I mean, I hope to, like the Encyclopedia of Surfing, I hope to someday have it online and continue to add to it and all of that. But for now, that's a great option.
Especially with Carissa as well, sort of, like winning the Olympics is kind of
absolutely
kind of laps it up. It's like full circle, right?
It was and there could not be a better representative of women's surfing than Carissa. I mean, there are a lot of really great women, but I mean, talk about just I said if Laura Ingalls Wilder had been living in Hawaii, the book would have been called Little House on the Piahi instead of Little House on the Prairie. But yeah, she's really great, and so many wonderful women, and they're so funny. In fact, I have 4 of them are coming over to be interviewed for this episodic film series we're doing this afternoon. But my favorite was Lane Beachley, because Lane and I have known each other since when she first came over to Hawaii, and she was living with Kenny Bradshaw, was her boyfriend, and she wasn't really even a big surf star at the time, but so I've known her for a really long time and really well. And so when I'm interviewing her and she stops me, she says, "Gee, what are you going to call the book?" And I said, "Well," and she said, "You know what you got to call it?" I go, "No, what?" She goes, "The surf shit, send out the girls." So I have a section in it called "Send Out the Girls," but I mean, that kind of in many ways, kind of in one sentence, encompasses what the story is about, so I really tried to look at it from the women's perspective, and really tried to get from them what their struggles were, what their thinking is about surfing, and about what's gone on, because that history has not really been told. And I guess that's why I was excited to sort of throw that out as an idea to my literary agent, because it is a story that hasn't been told. The history of women's surfing is really hasn't ever been comprehensively covered. And there's these women that are, for their time, just the giants of their era, just like the Mark Richards and the Kelly Slaters are, and the John Johns are. So they're super fun to write about. But as with movie stars or men surfers as well, some of the best stories are not of the best surfers. You know what I mean? Or the most famous. The most interesting stories sometimes come from people that you barely, that like were not as major a figure, but who have amazing stories. And I mean, Pauline Mesker did end up being a world champ, but her story with her arthritis, and her hard scrabble life, and like struggling through all this stuff, and then the week that she is she's up for winning a world title, she gets this arthritis attack, so she had to be pushed around in a wheelchair, and the only way she could practice was by floating in a pool and kicking her legs and her arms while she was weightless, and she goes out and wins the world title. I mean, you don't get stories better than that. You know what I mean? It's just like, it blows my mind even just telling it now,
Yeah.
But there's tons of those kind of stories that are, from Merle Sun to, to Marge Calhoun to Lane, and being adopted and not knowing it until she was a teenager, and I mean, just all these really, really fascinating pieces of history that many of them have been told, but they've never been collected. You know what I mean, into a volume. So that's what the book is.
Now looking I guess looking back on all the stories that you've told and people that you've spoken to, all the photos, all the like thousands of surf photos that you've seen. I mean, is there anything that you kind of do you think that I wouldn't say miss, but something that you like what's the next like the next story, or whether the next book or series like after you've kind of done the lifeguard piece? What do you think you'll do?
So I actually tell the story because it's something that I've come to like kind of get my head around, or it's sort of something I feel like I've discovered, and that is, surfing has always been somewhat dismissed or um, dissed by people in sort of the Spicoli kind of way.
Seen as degenerate kind of thing, you mean? Or
yeah, like... and just like sort of dopey surfer guys, like, wow, man. And I've always kind of wondered why that was, and why surfers couldn't better articulate what surfing was. And I was thinking about the fact that like all energy in the whole universe moves in waves. So light waves, sound waves, heat waves, radio waves, everything, right? Mm-hmm. that is energy in the universe moves in waves. And I mean, there are waves going through us right now, tons of them, all kinds, X-rays, I mean, and we don't really notice them. The only time you really actually experience the power of the universe is when you're riding a wave in the ocean. And I feel like that's what is the difference between, say, skiing or snowboarding or hitting a baseball out of the, or kicking a soccer ball through a goal. There's a thrill to all those things, but there's an added experience in surfing, which is this wave of energy that you are experiencing, right? So you do that for 2 or 3 hours, or 45 minutes for that matter, and you get out, you're kind of inarticulate. You're kind of like how would you describe that? Of course you sound like an idiot. It's like it's like Paul on the road to Damascus. I'm sure he sounded like an idiot when he got off his when he got back on his horse. It's like, I've just seen the light, But there's this. It's such a truly profound thing. I mean, I'm not a cosmic guy, but really, it's kind of a cosmic experience.
Yeah,
it truly is. It's riding the energy of the universe. So I feel like that's what not saying this, but that's what I'd like to infuse into this this episodic television series. Is sort of nice. What surfing is about. The true joy of it, and the fact that it's really a futuristic experience, not a. It's not an ancient one. It's a futuristic experience, and it's just that some ancients discovered it before others did.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's what I'm thinking for now.
Nice.
For the future.
And what's the best way if people want to get hold of you, if they want to, or if they want to get the book? How could they go about that?
So they can't. Well, I mean, I almost hesitate to say this, but they can buy it on Amazon. If they're in the United States, they can buy it at practically any bookstore, Barnes and Noble, or any major bookstore, or a lot of surf shops. So I would encourage them to like support their local surf shop first, their local bookstore second, and the internet last. But they can always get it on the internet. I mean, if they're in Australia and there's no place to get it, you can order it. You can also order it from Pegasus Books, which is an arm of Simon & Schuster, which is the publishing company that published the book. And so if they're a surf shop or a bookstore or something like that where they want to buy, or someone who wants to buy 10 copies or something like that, they can just write to the publisher, and that's Pegasus Books in New York, and they are a part of Simon & Schuster. And so I mean I don't have that in front of me, but if they Google Simon & Schuster, they'll get Pegasus and be able to order books easy.
Awesome.
Really easy. Or they can also write to jimkempton1@gmail.com, and I'll fix them up. So if you need that, I'm happy to provide my email, and
Awesome.
they can write. I'd love to hear input from from people as well, about the book. So yeah.
Nice. Jim, thanks so much for your time. It's been amazing. I could have gone on for hours and hours and hours and hours just asking you questions on all the surf spots you've seen alone. But yeah, I'm definitely going to get hold of a copy of the book, and yeah, I think it's really
I can have
cool
him
to see
I can have you send him one if you like. I'll have him just send me the mailing address when we get off here, and I'll have him send you one.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Jim.